Hello and welcome to the second part of our Moog One review. You may wonder why perhaps it's taken so long to get to this point, and indeed why there is also another Moog One behind me. Well, there's the story. Now, when I was doing the initial video, I hadn't got in forensically, and in the comments a guy called Paul Lawler Music said, "How's the tuning in the low octaves?" And I thought, oh, I don't know, I'll try it. And what happened was, when I pressed consecutive notes while in poly mode, so basically cycling through the voices, the pitch variation of each of the oscillators was drifting quite wildly. Minus a semitone plus a quarter tone, sort of really quite off. I mean, fine further up the keyboard. And I thought, that's not right. So I contacted Moog and they said, well, it seems that the calibration on this unit is off. And they actually said, oh, don't worry though, we can come in via the network port and fix it, which I thought was brilliant. What a great story. They can come in and sort of diagnose and fix stuff. Turns out that's not the case anymore. That system that they had was no longer functional. So sadly, there wasn't that sort of happy tech ending to that story. So what they did is they calibrated a unit at the factory and sent another one out, which is this one. That's the one that didn't work so good. So what this really tells me is, A, there's a lot of complex electronics in this, and if the shipping is maybe a bit vigorous or you're unlucky, you might end up with something that could be a little bit out of whack and needs looking at. The good news is also that they're working on a firmware update which will create a sort of user-friendly oscillator calibration routine. Now, oscillator calibration is something that I think you need to have absolutely nailed in a poly synthesizer, especially one with this many oscillators. And it's clear that it's not quite there yet. And it also indicates that the firmware is a sort of ongoing thing. I mean, we know this because Moog have been releasing firmware. It's been out for about a year, and there have been issues and they're working through fixing them. Obviously this is complicated and is taking time, but the firmware which had the calibration in is not there yet, though it will be out there soon. And that means if you do get yours and there's perhaps an issue, you will be able to fix that. But you've got to sort of bear in mind that this is an ongoing project to a degree, and it's a kind of testament to the complexity of this a synthesizer of this magnitude. Anyway, with that out of the way, we can crack on and take a look at the unit. So one question that was brought up was the multi-timbral action. So I've got a patch here called three-way action, and you can see I've got 3 synth engines enabled. You can tell that because all the keyboard controls on. If I switch one off, you can see it greys off. They're just working across the entire keyboard. So on my initial note, I've got this rather tasty sort of unison voice, and then if I press and hold, I bring in the second synth voice, and then if I press aftertouch, I've got various different routings. Like aftertouch is opening the filter on synth voice 2. It's also bringing in the tremolo voice and changing the speed of the tremolo, and those are all really useful things. I mean, these can all be either controlled via the keyboard. I can just switch them off, and then that means I could assign it via external MIDI, or I can change the split and layer depth. So if I just come here and I just go, right, I want to go my low note to there, my high note to there, and there you see I've just set the range of the keyboard. It's really easy to set up, actually, really easy. And one thing that I did find is, you've got a synth voice, you go, oh, that's nice. And you go, what would be nice? I'll just duplicate another synth voice or create a synth voice on synth 2 and then just kind of layer it up. And it's really easy to do. And that's one of the advantages of having a 16 voice. I know it's a lot of money, but with 16 voices, you can kind of go crazy, really. And most of these sounds we're using 2 oscillators at most, and I've got all these other sources to go with as well. And another question that came up was about the effects. So the effects, basically each synth has its own synth effect, which is per engine, but the master effect is global, which also brings us on to effects modulation. As with a lot of modern synthesizers, you can integrate LFOs and envelopes to modulate effects parameters. Unfortunately, on this you can't, and that's Something that I think Moog are probably going to be working on, because they're going to be, you've got synths like the Summit and the Hydrasynth and the DeepMind, plus there's probably loads of others that allow you to integrate the synth engine into the effects, and it's become sort of much more part of modern sound design. So I can't imagine it's going to be too long coming, if not already in the works. So more questions were about kind of how extended are the parameters, because if you see, each of these buttons will bring up a parameter access for the additional feature. So if I switch to the oscillators, press the oscillator tab at the top here, and we can see we've got VCA mode, pitch tracking, so we can take the pitch tracking off or scale it up to a couple of 100%, or just have it at less than 100%, so you get some interesting stuff. Note on reset, we've covered that before. Pitch bend offset, pitch bend up, down offset. That's pretty much it. What's quite interesting though is when we get into the LFOs, because the LFOs have a lot more parameters. So let's talk also about FM, because a lot of questions were about what's the FM like. So if we come back to my shot here, we've got a dedicated FM depth button from LFO 1. So if I just come in here, we start low mode, slow mode, low mode, medium mode, and high mode. Take the filter up a bit. So really, I didn't discover this till slightly later on, the range of the LFOs is amazing. Polarity, bipolar, start phase, variation. We've also got sync on and off to the master tempo, division, sync timing, delay time, fade in time, so we can have a hard in when where it's going to come in. So you can have it delayed by milliseconds up to, I think it's 10 seconds before it actually comes in, then a fade in time, fade in out time, number of repeats, and smoothing. A lot of potential there. So there's also the ability for FM modulation, and we can route that from 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 3 to 1. In this case, we've got 3 to 1. You can see roughly where the frequency is. I must say it's a little bit difficult to get it exactly. So I'm trying to get 3.5. I can't quite get it. Here we can get quite a lot of complex modulation in terms of FM. Just through routing the oscillators to each other. We haven't even got into the mod matrix at all yet. Similarly, we've got polyphony, where we can have unison and polycount, etc. And all the LFOs are the same. Remember, each of these LFOs, they can be set to be one per voice, or they can be trigger sync, key sync. There's loads of ways of doing it. Similarly, if we look at the envelopes, I'll take this mod down. I'm going to take go into loop mode. You get very high. And you can see we can change the attack. The curves can go from logarithmic to exponential for the decay and the release. There's all sorts of tweakable stuff here. And let's not forget, the LFOs can be in latch mode, they can sync, multi-trig, so that's one per voice. I mean, all of this, as you'd expect with something that's this much large S, we've got lots and lots per voice. And that means there's lots and lots of modulation as well. Effects on that. Some really interesting sounds there. Okay, so another thing that we should check out is the sequencer. On the sequencer, there's a 64-step, up to 64-step sequencer per synth engine, so that's 3 total. And the other thing that's very cool about this, I mean, they are polyphonic, of course. The other thing that's very cool about this is you record automation lanes. And as far as I understand, any parameter and every parameter, pretty much, can be recorded. There doesn't seem to be a limit. I couldn't find a number in the manual that said maximum 4 or whatever. So you can keep on stacking them up. And that makes this actually quite powerful. Of course, you could do the same thing where you could record parameter locks and have no notes and use it as a modulator, which is also very cool. We'll look at the sequence. We've got clock divisions, we've got timings. So if we go, we'll start with an 8th clock. We can record in real time or step time. There is no metronome though, which is perhaps a little bit of a shame. We're going to use the 16th, we're going to go 16 steps. There's all sorts of note resets, follow swing, restart on trigger, all that kind of stuff. Our first sequence, I'm going to play in step time. So I'm just going to record ready, and then I'm just going to play some chords in. So it's rest, 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 rest. See what that sounds like. Press C. Okay. Got some delay on that. Let's get to record a bit of step edit. So we can see in the step editor we got the notes, then we can go to the modulations, and then I press step mod and I can just tweak. So that works nicely. One thing I will say is you can't hear those parameters in real time, so you have to kind of tweak it blind, and the second time round it picks them up. This, for the life of me, I can't figure out why that is. I've spoken to Moog and they said, yeah, it's on the list of stuff to do, which is another indication of, you know, the firmware in progress, shall we say. So let's get on to something else. So we'll switch this back on. Take the keyboard out. Oh, I'll just go to home, take the keyboard out of record ready. So now we'll turn the keyboard on this guy. And perhaps what we'll do is we'll go into real-time record. And see what happens. So don't like that. I'm going to clear that sequence. Go back into record. 2, 3, 4. That's quite nice. You notice the step sequence seem to be slightly out. I don't quite know how they synchronize together, whether they start on the point. I couldn't find a parameter to that. So, right, let's go to third. We'll take that off. Take that off. That's out of record. And then we'll go into here. And I've got a lead line on this. So another thing I can do, I'm just going to come back to my Synth One and sequencer, and I'm going to turn it into quarter notes. So what I'm basically trying to describe is the fact that, I didn't realise, but you can sort of use it as a musical sketch pad. So it will allow you to kind of, a little bit clunky, but you can sort of throw down some ideas, save it as a multi, and the whole thing will be together as a kind of riff, as a little sort of sketch. And that's actually pretty cool. A couple of things I found while I was doing this, I did find that there were some bugs and issues in the sequencer. When I was playing it yesterday, I was filming and the thing rebooted. That's not good, is it? That's never good. So, that's the one thing that is a little bit of a kind of black spot here, because we've got this beautiful sounding instrument, we're capable of all these things, but some of these features are just not quite prime time, I would say, and they need more work. And it's disappointing to know that, but I've really got to point it out. Okay, so given my last statement, I think perhaps what I should concentrate on is what I know this is really good at, and what it's really good at is creating sounds and complex sounds. The synthesis engine itself is it's state of the art, state of the art analog. There's a lot of things that you could do here. I will try and answer some of your other questions as we go along, because as we know, I know you wanted to ask about, say, the network port, for instance, and at the moment it doesn't seem to do anything specific. There's no real kind of functionality that I can see. What I'd like to see, for instance, is RTP MIDI, maybe a way to get in, or there might be other things that this can do that you can access over the network that I don't know about yet, but we'll see. So here's a patch which is just 3 square wave pitch modulations. It sounds like it's got effects going on, but there aren't actually any effects. Let's just switch on the other 2 oscillators, because I've got them working in different ways. So the first oscillator is, second oscillator is in a sort of amplitude, and this is doing pitch. So now we've got these incredible, complicated no effects on there yet. Let's put a bit of delay and a bit of master effects. Cascading things. One thing I will point out here, and this is something that if I go to the mod depth, if I press the mod button, we've got a lot of potential modulation. There's just I don't know how many possible modulation slots are. They don't seem to be limited. But for instance, what I've got is the mod wheel here. I'm running the mod wheel to change the pitch, and it's actually, if I take it out of, so we'll just go. We'll just go direct. We'll come back. Now, I don't know if you can see here, but the amount is around 0.5%. I'll just reroute this, and you can see if I disable that one and we do it again. So I'm going to go LFO3 to LFO1 amount. So I'm going to turn this. Now, if we go close, 2% is too much, almost 1% is too much. Just trying to dial in a tiny amount is quite difficult. So that in some ways, the digital assignment is in a linear fashion, where it'd be nice if it was a bit more, not exponential, logarithmic, so that we could have a little bit more detail. But there is actually a shift function. So if I come back in again and I press the shift control, it doesn't work for the actual parameter that I'm twisting over here, but I can use the big knob with shift plugged in to actually get a much more granular control. And if I hit done, and then I go to my routing, I pressing shift and then adjusting it with this little knob also gives me that same level of granular control. Because the control law on the panel of the knobs is lovely, as with a lot of Moog products, they've got that absolutely right, the way that they respond, things like the sort of, the smaller amounts have a greater resolution at the lower end. We haven't got that on some of the digital control. And also, while I'm at it, if I come back and say, we come back to the home page, and I'm just going to, now what I want to do is maybe I want to tweak this knob. I can't see where it is. So there's no sort of comparison function. So I'm unable to because I might just sort of think, oh, I want to put it back to where it was and I just want to move it a little bit. There's no actual indicator on the screen to show you where the sort of stored value is, or the previous value is, and that's something that I could quite use, especially with something this complicated. But having said that, there is actually a compare function. So if I come in tight here and I adjust my LFO amount control, you can see the number is changing here, and if I press compare, it goes back to what it was. So I can flip it around. The only thing about that is it actually recalls all the parameters at the same time. So you kind of, it's not just like I can't see one parameter, it actually just, it's flipping the edit buffer. But while we're on the subject of this, there are some other cool features. So I might be on a sort of sonic journey through a patch. I can hit a snapshot and that will store all of the front panel controls into a sort of sub patch, and I can view that by pressing shift snapshot, and it will show me the date, the time, the autosave, and then kind of what patch it was based on. That's actually quite a useful function, because more often than not when you're working with a synth of this complexity, you're kind of wandering off, so you can always remember to hit snapshot, and then that will give you kind of these points along the journey. Another thing to point out is we've got these program buttons here which allow us to store favorites. So we've got banks and memory locations, and it's really, really easy. Basically, if I want to just store my current patch into a performance, I just press and hold. Select the bank, select the patch. Then if we come back to the main panel here and I press the more button, we've got all these different sets. We can browse sets, we can arrange the sets, we can edit. So it's very easy to create and arrange live sets for the live player, or if you just want to organize favorites. Really nice and simple. Anyway, let's get on to some more sounds. I don't remember what I did with this one, but it's a very complicated sound. There's some FM mod in it, and there's another FM sound I've got here. Very nice. Right, let's see if I can find a couple of... now it is possible to do quite a lot of FM with this. As we said, we've seen the LFOs go really high up. You've got cross mod, you've got ring mod. This one I call sort of, it's like a Japan type sound. So let's hear what this sounds like. Reminds me of those kind of tin drum Prophet 5 sort of. Quite like that. And what I've done here is I've added pitch bend to the oscillator mod, which is, I'm affecting the pitch of oscillator 3, I think, on this one. Quite nice. Now this one's called Kitchen. I can't remember why. Watch the level of that. No effects on that. That's all happening internally, and I can't remember what I did. I think this one is called Wow Wow Pad. I might have played this in the previous video. And we've got just a bit of delay on this. I mean, there's no doubt a lot of these patches came from sort of musical journeys where I just start with an init patch and then off you go and you're away, because there's so many possibilities for routing and modulations. Right, so in this, what I've got is a triangle wave, oscillator 1 going into the state variable filter. I've just filtered it down a bit so that I'm matching in the ladder filter. This is all resonance. There's no oscillator going through. So I'll tune that up so that we're listening to both. So a little bit of change between each voice. I mean, if we go into mono mode, tune that up. It's pretty good because we're tuning to the same voice, but it goes down to about, I mean, this is C3, so C2 and below, it's not so good. And if you take it out of mono mode, which means each time we play a note, we're triggering a different voice, you can hear there's a little bit of wander and variation. But I have to say this is way better than it was on the first version I got. So, and this has had a slight tweak to the firmware. So the filter calibration has been improved in the version that I've got here, which I think is probably rolling out to everybody. You'll be able to download that. Again, I should also point out that that oscillator calibration user-facing thing is in the pipeline, should be coming soon. So all of those problems will have gone in so much as you can. I mean, you're going to get a little bit of variation across that many voices, of course. So let's flip through a few more sounds. This time I've got some of the factory ones. This is number 2, called A Destiny, and it's a really sort of lovely, brassy, very sort of moody sound. Some lovely stuff there. I mean, and that is majestic and sort of impressive and upfront, and that's, you know, that's what you would expect from a Moog polysynth, right? This is the sort of sounds that we want, and this is sort of quite straightforward and simple without masses of modulation, but there are a ton more in here. Let's have a look some more. This one's more of an arpeggiator kind of sound. It's using three layers, and of course we're using the XY pad, which I haven't really mentioned much yet. XY pad gives us the ability to do additional modulations with a hold function as well. I mean, there's just a ton of really nice stuff in here. I think what I'm kind of struggling with a little bit is, you know, this is a very expensive instrument. It's got a fantastic sound engine. It's just the firmware is not really up to scratch in its entirety. You know, you can't use every feature. If you were to buy this and you were about to go on a world tour and you wanted to use the sequencer or some of the other functions, they wouldn't work right now. But if you're buying it in terms of, you know, you want to have something that's going to last for a long time, because it's a beautifully built instrument, you know, they are working on it, there is going to be more updates, and we know that Moog have a strong reputation of making lovely things, and this is a lovely thing, then, you know, you can go on that journey and you can still use it. I just, you know, it's not necessarily, everything is not necessarily mission critical ready, and I think that's quite an important distinction to make if you're thinking about this in those terms. Okay, so we should have a look. There's a vocoder in here because we've got an external input which we can access via the mixer page. Just hitting the little triangle brings up those parameters. We can set all the different parts, but we're not doing that here. What we've got going on here is the vocoder effect is accessed via the synth effect. So effect type, we've got a 16 band and a 10 band vocoder. So I've actually, rather than set it up, I'm going to go browse presets, and I've set it to vocoder in all. So I'm going to start with a few vocoders, and we'll just play a few through a few of them and see how they sound. Right, I've got my headphones on because I don't really want to get too much feedback, and I don't really want the shot of me talking on the mic, so I'm going to go to this one. So this is the one. So 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Let's try this monobot vocoder. A bit more effects on that one. Saw vocoder. One time you use the vocoder, you can articulate the vocoder, and then it's a question of whether or not you can hear what I'm saying. Now, the articulation's not bad. I've heard better, but it's got that kind of slightly old school vibe. It does take a little bit of signal. I've got a dynamic mic plugged into the back here because there's a line input and an external mic input. I don't believe there's any phantom power on this, and the dynamic mic, I mean, if I was going to do this properly, I'd probably set up a compressor to get a little bit more of a clever response here. But the vocoder is kind of fun. It's nice to have. There's a 10 voice, a 10 band and a 16 band. I mean, a lot of sort of modern contemporary vocoders have higher bands. The higher amount of bands you have, the more articulation you get, and you can get that sort of noise sound. So yeah, it's worth having, I guess, but it's not the best vocoder I've heard, but it's got a sort of old school, traditional vibe to it. So this is the Moog One 16 voice. This costs around about 7,400 UK pounds. There's also an 8 voice version, which is exactly the same as this, but only has 8 voices, and that is around 5,800. So it's a chunk of change, and it's the sort of instrument that you're going to probably develop a long-term relationship with. You know, it's built to last. There's a lot to explore here, and it's the sort of thing that you're going to spend a lot of time exploring. Anyway, thank you very much. That's it for this time. See you next time.